Welcome everyone to the Faith Futures Festival at Pitt Street Uniting Church, and a very warm welcome to Hal Taussig, who is our keynote speaker for tonight and tomorrow and our preacher on Sunday. It's wonderful to have you with us, Hal, and it's wonderful to have all of you with us here too. I just want to say a little bit about Pitt Street, about this tradition that we now have of offering these events in progressive Christianity. Because Pitt Street has had a long tradition of theological open-mindedness and advocacy for social justice, which places us in the contemporary movement of the spirit that is called progressive Christianity. This church has a proud tradition of engaging with public issues. During the apartheid era, South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu addressed a packed church here when no Sydney church of his own denomination would host him. Last year, Pitt Street was one of the first 10 churches to offer sanctuary to people fleeing from persecution in their own countries and then from persecution by the Australian government, which intended to remove them back to offshore detention on Nauru. We passionately support an end to offshore detention and the Bring Them Here campaign, and our hearts break for the loss of the 6 lives on Manus and Nauru under this evil policy. Pitt Street people have been involved in queer justice issues since the 1980s, and for the last several years we have been advocating for civil marriage equality and for a change in the Uniting Church doctrine of marriage to allow marriages for LGBTI couples. Over the past 2 months we have worked tirelessly and been involved in setting up the umbrella group Australian Christians for Marriage Equality, and if you haven't found that you should Google it and have a look at our website and our Facebook page. We've been working to get the Christian voice of justice, compassion and inclusion recognised in the public debate during the postal survey through social and mainstream media. And may I just remind you that ticking that yes on that vote paper is not enough. You have to take it to the mailbox. It's an old-fashioned thing, but it will not work unless you actually post it. This month, many churches in Sydney are celebrating 500 years since the Reformation. Some of the events organised by nearby churches represent a view that is still very enamoured of the doctrinal developments of 500 years ago. The Reformation was undoubtedly a significant time in the life of the Christian church, but we decided that here at Pitt Street we would have a festive celebration focusing on the futures of Christianity. So the Faith Futures Festival, with music and wine and song and a celebration of life, is part of our ongoing commitment to progressive Christianity. Progressive Christianity involves our heads, our hearts and our hands. It is theological, it is spiritual, it is justice-seeking and it is compassionate. And so we are delighted to have amongst us tonight Professor Hal Taussig. Hal's vocation is marked by the intersection of academic and congregational experience. For 30 years, he has been both a scholar and a working pastor. A New Testament theologian, he holds professorial rank at both the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philadelphia and at Union Theological Seminary in New York. He is a fellow of the Jesus Seminar and author of 13 books. Hal's latest book, A New Testament, about which we will be hearing more tonight and tomorrow, looks at early Christian documents that were not included in the New Testament, providing new lenses through which we may experience the gospel of Jesus Christ. Of his vocation in churches, Hal has said that his major pastoral work was to be a primary figure in restarting 2 local churches that were on the verge of dying and which are now vibrant communities. Almost all of his time as a professor has been teaching New Testament at the graduate or seminary level. And for 2 of his early books, he was officially accused of heresy within the United Methodist Church, which I think is always a mark of very good scholarship. And he was, however, exonerated on these charges. Other things that I found out about Hal through Google are that he was raised on a cattle ranch in the High Rockies, that he loves Motown, modern ballet and racquetball. Please join me in welcoming our guest speaker, Professor Hal Taussig.
Thanks so much, Margaret, for your generous welcome, and to all of you for your kind invitation. You all know how to do it right. Wine and cheese, music. Whoever thought that theologians would have it so good? Thanks so much for this generous time and for the honor of being in this really sacred and powerful place. Well, here I am in Australia. I've never been here before. I do this kind of thing a lot in the United States. I know enough about religion that real insight about it comes mainly when one understands how culture works. So the embarrassing thing about me talking to you about ancient and postmodern religion this evening is that I don't really know your culture very well. So we all need to acknowledge the pretense of me talking to you about this subject matter. Or if, on the other hand, we want to risk another error, if I happen to actually bring something helpful and new to you, you can just always write it off as one of those weird American things. And then there is the American deal, right? We Americans are taught to naturally think that we're the most powerful, the best, and the smartest. So good luck tonight. And then there's the title of tonight's talk. The Reformation? That's in the title. Did you notice that? I didn't say the 16th century, and we're all perhaps a bit relieved at Margaret's reassuring. I've never really been attracted to the 16th century Reformation myself. So just to let you know in advance, I won't be talking about Martin Luther or John Calvin or whoever else. But actually, your invitation has occasioned me to think a couple of new thoughts. I've never given this talk before. So, Rachel, it's you and me, right? You got a new song. I got a new song. I hope we're in tune. I'm really interested in the idea of Reformation as a metaphor. It's quite exciting to me to think together with you about how to change the disastrous situation of most of Christianity and its places in the world, and to try to think of something more important, meaningful, joyful, vibrant, and relevant. So here's what I'm thinking about for our time tonight. Let's spend that time thinking about the ways Christianity is being reformed into something vibrant and how it might be reformed into something vibrant. We do need to admit that except for parts of Africa, parts of Latin America, and all of Korea, Christianity is mostly failing throughout most of the world, both in its substance and its numbers. I am gripped by profoundly new and healthy emergence of non-normative Christianities in our time, despite the overall decline. I mean here to describe the broad swaths of new reforming Christianities. I aim to give images, stories, and examples of those blossoming Christianities. The downside is that I'm going to be talking about it in the United States. As I did 12 years ago with the Polbridge Press publication of A New Spiritual Home, Progressive Christianity at the Grassroots, I want primarily to describe these movements through providing defining characteristics. Let me be clear that my firsthand pastoral experiences and my extensive direct grassroots research over the past 30 years wants to stand both over against and on the shoulders of the whining, mostly liberal Protestant Christians have been doing for the past 30 years. Against such whining, because it's much more fun to think constructively about what is and can be done to reform Christianities. On the shoulders and dependent on such whining, because we have had time to notice what we don't like about Christianity and churches in the modern era. That is, I ask your attention to a strongly embodied set of spiritual and social practices, fresh constructionist theologies, and diffuse congregational and parish-based communities of the past 30 years. Your kind invitation to me allows me to place special emphasis on the last 10 years since my A New Spiritual Home book. Although this new set of descriptions underline, revise, and correct the defining characteristics of the 2006 grassroots, so-called progressive Christianity, they tonight mean to stay within A New Spiritual Home's primary principle and methodology of description of real phenomenon, rather than wishful thinking, abstract principles, or playful brainstorming. As such, it is a hands-on update and persistent preference for in-place practices rather than proposals and prescriptions of what progressive Christianity should be. I look forward to talking descriptively about the wide range of these smart, postmodern, intellectual clarities and multiple, queer, and subtle spiritual depths, while we think together about bright, less arrogant, and decentered Christianities. My primary characteristics of progressive Christianity in 2006, yawn, to which I still hold descriptively, but which I am eager to add some twists and another level of descriptive characteristics. Those primary characteristics were spiritual vitality, intellectual integrity, transgressive gender boundaries, vitality without superiority, justice, and ecology. In the 2006 book, I listed and described 1,000 such local churches that have these characteristics. Here, right now, are two quick looks at the websites of two of them in their current guise. This is the Jubilee Fellowship in Asheville, North Carolina. It has been going for a good 15 years. Just look around and see what it's like, and scroll down as we scroll down and look at this definition of who we are. And then let's go to who we are as a community in North Carolina. North Carolina, by the way, is a quite conservative part of the country. And just take a look at and read a little bit about what this says. Notice what they do, what they hope for. And then let's go to who we are, our community, on the next, on what is creation spirituality, which is the key spirituality of this group, which is deeply ecological. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll read a little bit. Thank you. Come up front next time. So creation spirituality honors all of creation as holy gift. Creation spirituality seeks to integrate the wisdom of Eastern and Western spirituality and global indigenous cultures with the emerging post-modern scientific understanding of the universe and the awakening artistic compassion for creativity. Let's look at who we are in terms of Sunday celebrations, how we celebrate. Next there, yeah. So you'll see it's in the round, and then look here at what the folks are after: love for one another, for the earth, and for all who inhabit it. Compassion for those who may be hurting and in need, acceptance for every person without exception, music, Grateful Dead, Mumford and Sons, and Jimmy Buffett tunes blended with old-time hymns, laughter, some of the worst jokes and puns imaginable. Inspiration, weekly messages that offer insights into the world religions, Christian, Jewish, Taoist, Muslim, Buddhist, and others, and into current events. And then you can go at 9:45 if you want. Thanks so much, Warwick. Let's look at one other website, St. Lydia's. St. Lydia's, you'll notice, is a dinner church and a waffle church. That means basically all services are with full meal eating. You'll see stunning pictures of this, and let's hear a little bit. I'll read right below. You're looking for an experience of the holy, one that is strong enough to lean on, deep enough to question, and challenging enough to change you. If you're not sure what you believe, rest assured that neither are we. We place practice before belief, trusting that the practice of eating, praying, and singing together that moves us deeper into faith. Instead of trying to figure out what we believe, we're trying to live what we practice. Let's hear some of them talk.
One of the things I love the most about St. Lydia's is that it's a thing still in the process of becoming, and that's part of its identity.
Our central act at St. Lydia's is to gather together around a meal and around a table. The idea is that when we're at this table together, there's a way in which we're practicing for how we'd like to be when we're out in the world. So it's a table where we learn how to feed one another and where we learn how to be fed. It's a table where we learn to be compassionate with one another and patient with one another. And it's a table where we learn to be open to God's presence and to spend time sort of feeling that movement and that presence in our lives.
We start our worship by gathering around a central candle and singing a lamp lighting hymn. And we all light our own candles from that one central candle and pass the fire from one person to the next. And then as we sing, we process to the tables and light all the candles on the tables. And by doing that, we all get to participate in marking this space as sacred.
So there's a story in the book of Luke that's about Jesus after the resurrection meeting two disciples on the road, and they don't recognize him. And what happens is that they come together for dinner, and when they sit down at the table, Jesus breaks bread. And it says that he was known to them in the breaking of the bread, that in the moment that the bread broke, the disciples recognized Christ. Richard, this is my body.
This is my body.
Amen. And that's really the story that's at the heart of everything that we do together, that when we gather together at this table and when we break bread and share it, there's a sense that Christ is in our midst, and not only is Christ there with us at the table, but he's also present in each of us so that we can be Christ to one another.
Earlier in my life, I had an idea that going to church meant making certain proclamations and adhering to certain theories. But being at St. Lydia's and sitting down every week next to strangers, I found that in that moment, when I pass the bread and the bread is passed to me, that God is present and I feel connected to something bigger than myself.
And Jesus stands on the shore of the gray morning in the dawn, the same hour that he appeared to Mary Magdalene in the garden. Dawn, when the night is not quite over, but the day has not quite begun. He appears, inhabiting this in-between time when darkness and light are intermingled. His question to the disciples breaks my heart. "Children, you have no fish, have you?" And they answer him, "No, we have been fishing all night and we haven't caught anything." When the catch comes in, it is more than they could have ever dreamed of, more than they could ever consume. And still, we are told, the net does not tear.
I think St. Lydia's appeals to people who maybe live far away from family, and either emotionally or geographically, and crave a home-cooked meal in the company of people who will accept them for who they are, no matter what they are.
So we finish our worship by everyone in the congregation helping to clean up all the food and the dishes and all the big mess that we've made. And that's one of my favorite moments in the service, because I think there's a way in which you can kind of see the community that's been formed over the course of the evening, that when we came together at the beginning of the night, we were strangers to one another, and by the end of the night, we're friends.
I think that there's a big emphasis in our culture on the finished product, but I've realized that I learned something from the process of making something, and that's really where the value is for me in being an artist. And I think that's true at St. Lydia's as well. By making church together every week, we learn about ourselves, and it doesn't really matter if the singing sounds perfect or if the food tastes perfect, or, it really matters that we did it and that we wrestled with it for a while together.
Amen, amen, amen.
Holy food for holy people, share in the meal.
The last Sunday that I was at St. Lydia's, about 145 on that Sunday in the waffles and the dinner meal. We'll see a little bit more of that later. This evening, then, I offer complementary yet somewhat different set of characteristics. So these new characteristics are meant to take advantage of the last 10 plus years to identify some deeper swirls of the 2006 characteristics. The first characteristic to think about newly is vulnerability. I want to talk about how people and God, being vulnerable, is transforming to reforming. Here's why. Some of us have known about the fact that when we became aware of the Holocaust in the 20th century of Jews, the picture of God as all-powerful and all-loving broke down forever. The question was for us then, right? How could a loving God and an all-powerful God let 6 million people be killed? So my proposal is that God cannot be both. That God is vulnerable, and that I propose to you the vulnerable God is good and loving, but not all-powerful. We learned this again in the Cambodian massacres, didn't we? And we learn this again when we think about and know about the indigenous massacres over and over again. So let's first notice the fresh alternative beyond the all-powerful, all-loving God of pre-Holocaust days. The characteristic of vulnerability can point to a somewhat powerful divinity and partial healing as a core attribute of God. There have always been ways of talking about Jesus that way, right? And there are also other spiritual paths that articulate power that point towards not almighty and incomplete and healing and compassion. Please read John Caputo's signature book, The Weakness of God. The Weakness of God. It lays this out, and it's the first major theological work written in the late 1990s that helps us think about that. But if you're not into reading theologians, that's congratulations for you. But then listen to Leonard Cohen sing. And listen to Leonard Cohen tell us about the broken hallelujah and how important it is to sing the broken hallelujah. Or read Barbara Brown Taylor's New York Times bestseller, the title, Learning to Walk in the Dark, in which she tells us how much we lose when God is always bright and all-powerful. 21st century Christianities can learn from and articulate clear practices of vulnerability as they seek to find ways past the arrogance, self-absorption, and privileged social location of classic Christianity. Indeed, it may be that social, theological, and political vulnerabilities are primary in Christianity's chances to undo the classic Christianity's violence and arrogance and attract new demographic constituencies. Living fully in today's world beckons people toward vulnerability as a way to connect with one another and move past rhetorics of superiority. And then there's the Thunder Perfect Mind. We're going to preach about it on Sunday morning. This is one of those texts found in the ancient Egypt sands just less than 100 years ago, and has been received not by people in church, not by us scholars, but the artists. Ridley Scott, winner of multiple awards, has done a film about it. Toni Morrison has dedicated 2 of her award-winning novels to the Thunder Perfect Mind. Umberto Eco has written a whole part of Foucault's Pendulum about the Thunder Perfect Mind. This is a voice of a vulnerable God. Let me just read it if you can't read it back there. She says, "Do not be arrogant when I am thrown to the ground. Do not stare at me when I am thrown out among the condemned. Do not laugh at me in the lowest places. Do not throw me down among those slaughtered viciously. I am the first and the last. I am she who is honored and she who is mocked. I am the whore and the holy woman. I am the wife and the virgin. I am he, the mother and the daughter. I am the limbs of my mother. I am a sterile woman, and she has many children. I am she whose wedding is extravagant, and I didn't have a husband. I am she who exists in all fears and in trembling boldness." So I propose vulnerability as a primary way both to reform God, the world, and Christianity, and present a present resource and the characteristic for Christianity's reconstructing Christians themselves toward grounded and vibrant life. The next characteristic, queerness. I've been told that maybe some of you don't know what I mean when I say queerness. It's one of my favorite postmodern ways of thinking and being, rooted in the experience of lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intergender, trans woman, third gender, drag queen, gynecosexual, closeted drag king, and other kinds of gendered people, a powerful new social identity theory has developed that is called queer theory. Already, the queerness theorized by this important new perspective has leapt out of the gender box and is helping us think about a wide spectrum of how to be humans together and understand our identities more fluidly. All parts of our identities. Standing alongside of new intersectional, hybrid, and post-colonial theorizing, queerness is blazing new ways of thinking about everything, from national identities through biblical studies to massive migrations, resisting abstract and high constructs of sameness. Queerness is opening ways to welcome multiple, uncomfortable differences, complicate phenomena that have been caricatured, leave in flux life that those in control want to pigeonhole, and mix complexly otherwise rigidly separated realities. My favorite images of queerness is Sesame Street. Did you all know about the romance between Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy? Sometimes it worked really well and sometimes it didn't, but it was a real clash of identities. We know that, don't we? I understand that you all watched it when you were kids too. But, take a deeper look at the queerness of Sesame Street. Well, I know that Bert and Ernie are right there at the center, right? That was a joke. I was told that you would get about 30% of my jokes, and you're working on that. But look also at all the other differences in this picture. All the differences, the companionings, the sloppy, indistinguishable blendings of all kinds of humans with their overlapping identities, with Oscar the Grouch, Big Bird, Count Dracula, the Cookie Monster, Snuffleupagus. By the time Sesame Street gets done with us, we don't know whether we're a human or a grouch or a Snuffleupagus. Now, this is the delight and complicated identities of a larger queerness. It is this queerness paradigm that can reform societies and relationships around the world so that ruling discursive categories no longer impose themselves on people's realities, belongings, identities, and behaviors. As such, queerness is already a powerful reformation away from overdeterminedness and categoricalness, and towards strangeness, incompleteness, and complicated identities. Similarly, in terms of the new construction of Christianities, Queerness is a characteristic and resource to live into indeterminacy, hybridity, and fluidness. The next characteristic is what I call democratic ritual. You notice the four characteristics are up there. I always got in big letters the one we're talking about. Democratic ritual. Today, for both society at large and reforming Christianities in particular, people are claiming meanings and identities by creating and practicing rituals, whether they are officially sanctioned or not. Some of you apparently know, I've been told, about kneeling in America these days. Kneeling in America these days on athletic fields turns out to be a powerful ritual. Who would have known that it was so powerful that it made people mad and made people think they were more deeply themselves than ever before? This is what I call democratic ritual. That is, it comes from the stuff itself of living. And it's not that somebody told you could do it. It's that it was inside you. Rituals not from above, not necessarily in churches, not by instruction, but by desire and authenticity. Of course, in many ways, this is closest to the closest to the definition of liturgy. Liturgy, some of you know, in Greek means the work of the people. The work of the people. Not following something someone told us to do or trained us to do. Such democratic ritual exhibits power, imagination, and solidarity in people's lives. I don't know whether this has happened in this sanctuary, but it's happening all over the place, right? I pastored 2 churches in which this was one of the biggest worship services of the year, in which which all of the animals got blessed. This is a democratic ritual. I didn't know they wanted to do that, but boy, do they want to do that. People from all around the neighborhood, they're not sure what else they want to do in worship, but they're sure they want to bring their pets. Yeah, cats. I blessed a horse. Or remember all of this stuff that's going on with lighting candles around death. See how powerful that's been both inside congregational settings and outside. When I've done All Saints' Day, it's also one of the biggest times in the worship service in the year, because people, I say, think about who you lost and come and light a candle for it. Twice as many people come, because working on what it means to lose someone in death is important. They'll light a candle no matter where. If there's an automobile that has killed somebody, all of a sudden there are candles there. Ritual that is democratic. It's not just that democratic ritual is close to standard definition of liturgy, or to the 16th century Reformation that enacted the reading of the Bible by the people and not by the clergy. Democratic ritual is in full bloom in our time. In the broad cultures, body surfing at rock concerts. Anybody here body surfed? Oh, I saw 2 hands. It's amazing. And nobody said for them to do that, I mean, so those of you who don't know it, you're in the rock concert, and all of a sudden people are carrying you and sending you up and down the space, and they're holding you. In the broader cultures, body surfing, American footballers kneeling at their national anthem are not happening because someone tells them to do it, but because it makes sense in their lives in new and deep ways. In reforming Christian congregations that I know for the last 20 years, one of the biggest ways of worshiping, besides the dogs and the candles, is this thing that by and large is called joys and concerns, or bringing what's on your heart or what's on your mind and speaking it in your worship. Don't let the clergy do that. So many people now in different congregations, that's the biggest thing in the worship. It overshadows the sermon because people want to say what's on their hearts and their minds in a few sentences. So, in both societies at large and in Christianity, such rituals defy hierarchical and intellectualist controls in order to make deeper meaning in their own practice and reform life itself. Finally, here, tomorrow we're going to talk about this democratic ritual. It's amazing. Some of you, none of you, anybody know what this is? This is the Gospel of Mary. The Gospel of Mary, I said. The Gospel of Mary, and more than 100 documents from the earliest part of Christianity have been found in the last 100 years. That is, we've found just in the last 100 years more than we had before. And some of them are named things like the Gospel of Mary. Well, you know what happened? And we'll see this tomorrow in thoroughness. But when these more than 100 new documents were found over the last century, the churches said, don't worry about that, that's nothing. The scholars like me said, oh, it's probably just second-rate and heretical. But you know who caught on to it? It was the public. I can't tell you how many times over the last 20 years that in a setting like this, someone came up to me and said, did you hear about that new early Christian document? And I said, don't worry about it, it's probably heresy. It was the public, democratic ritual of reading this stuff that made them love it. Now even we clerics and we professors have to read about it too. Finally, spirituality. Here too, interesting parallels are parallel developments to 16th century Reformation practices. Both larger society and reforming 21st century Christianity's spiritual practices are broadly afoot. Let's remember this. We all know that. Some of us may not like it. But, now Buddhist and Hindu meditations are everywhere, even in Christian worship services. Who thought that up? Who ordered that to happen? As Margaret said, one of my professorates is at the Rabbinical College. They call them now, in Judaism, Bujus, Buddhists and Jews together, who are doing Buddhist and Hindu meditations in synagogue. And of course you know how that happens. I bet you that happens in this space as well. Spirituality is oozing from every place so that people can claim it on their own. Conservative and liberal intellectuals alike are nervous that wide-ranging kinds of early medieval Christianity, Sufi, nativizing, Jewish, and Wiccan practices are emerging helter-skelter. Have you ever been to Taizé in France? This amazing, part Protestant, part Catholic monastery in the rural France, in which 3 times a day more than 1,500 young people from around the world come to chant Gregorian song, and then go out afterwards between the prayer services and talk about social issues that they concern. There are Taizé. You probably have Taizé too. No, I think I saw it maybe tomorrow or something, or Sunday. There are Taizé. You have them all around. There are people chanting as if they were medieval monks. Where did that come from? Spirituality is a thing that is at the heart, a characteristic of reforming Christianities. Ever heard? I've just run into this everywhere. Home altars. When I was growing up, people didn't build their own altars in their homes. Now they're everywhere. You walk into somebody's bedroom or living room, and there are a bunch of little rocks, or a Bible, or some pictures around some flowers or something. And I say, "Oh, well, that's nice flowering," and they say, "Oh, that's my altar." In general, these deep impulses toward embodiment of meaning rather than intellectual clarity or orderly process claim curious mixtures of various religious traditions, new art forms, and populist musical and meditation practices as they tumble out, as real reforming happens inside and outside Christianities. Spiritual practice today, not unlike the deeper democratizing moves of the 16th century Reformation, reform the social and personal dimensions of life. Let me show you a couple more websites, and then we'll talk together. This is the Chestnut Hill United Church in Philadelphia. We're going to just see some pictures of them. Let's move from that part of their website over to About, and let's scroll down. I'll read this for you. Our priorities. Excellent Excellent. Well, let's read our priorities up top. Honoring the diversity and paths to God. Chestnut Hill United Church is a faith community with open hearts and open minds. Excellent worship. Environmental and social advocacy. Children and youth are their priorities. These are our 3 priorities. These areas have been identified as the places where we will invest additional time, energy, and resources over the next 3 to 5 years. We believe this is a part of our becoming even more vibrant, meaningful, and spiritually powerful as a community. Excellent worship. Our worship regularly has people speaking openly each week their prayers of joy, excitement, pain, and longing. The diverse and festive music in our worship makes our prayers and participation deeper. Powerful preaching draws us both inward toward spirit and outward toward the vibrancy and intangibles of the world around us. Innovative and new, as well as traditional and meaningful rituals, make our worship creative, embodied, and spiritually relevant. Environmental and social advocacy. And then let's scroll on down there because that goes on and on as to how much they do. Children and youth. Oh, here, let me read the children and youth a little bit. Thank you, Warwick. Children and youth you could see from the pictures, is one of their priorities. Our worship is alive with the sounds, sights, and participation of children and youth. They are vivacious contributors to who we are as a congregation. We celebrate our children and youth, their questions, their spirituality, and their presence. Our programming takes seriously their spiritual, emotional, and developmental needs, and our worship and activities involve them in important ways. Let's move to one other website, St. Miriam's. Let's just look for a moment at home there, and then let's click on what makes Miriam different, St. Miriam different.
If you're Catholic and have recently come across St. Miriam, we're glad our paths have crossed. You might be interested to know that St. Miriam is really Catholic. Yep, that's right. Here's a little history. There are actually 3 main Catholic traditions. There are Roman Catholics, Orthodox Catholics, and Old Catholics. And the main differences amount to little more than politics rather than theology. So, what makes St. Miriam different? Well, first of all, we don't believe that the Pope is infallible. We also allow everyone who comes and worships with us to receive Holy Communion. And finally, we don't prohibit those who are gay, divorced, transgendered, or any other factor from our parish. Radical, huh? Yeah, we know. In other words, we welcome everyone, affirm the dignity of every person, and fling wide our doors to all who wish to join us. We still honor the 7 sacraments, the Mass, and a bit of fun fellowship too. But we keep our eyes on the ball, and for us, the ball is Jesus. So come and see for yourself what makes St. Miriam different. What have you got to lose? You might just find a new parish to call home.
And if we can, Warwick, let's try one more under about for their welcome. If not, we can skip that.
My name is Bob Wilson. I'm number 376.
My name is Tiffany Briner, and my number is 511.
My name is Sean Little. My number is 105.
I was searching to find a place that really was so accepting, so warm, so friendly. And I found it here at St. Miriam's, and this is what I've always thought church should be.
My name is Deborah Ragusa, and my number is 474.
I was, kind of fed up with the politics of the Roman Catholic Church.
There shouldn't be judgment and belittling talk, but unfortunately, that is so when you go to some churches.
My name is Sean Hall, and I am number 2.
My name is Monsignor Jim.
and I'm number one.
Here in our home at St. Miriam's, I see that love and care and support of one another.
My name is Kristen Milford.
My name is Dante Milligan.
My number is 5'10".
My number is 5'11".
St. Miriam is a community where you feel welcomed from the moment you step into our doors, and there are no boundaries, no man-made or artificial boundaries here. So, in short, St. Miriam truly is for everybody.
As I grew older and was in college, I became less and less involved in church until I realized that there was something missing in my life.
My name is Kathleen Duncan, number 389.
My name is Deacon Dorothy Clemis, and I am number 305.
My name is Father Joseph Clemis, and my number is 306.
And I think I just Googled, open and accepting Catholic churches, and St. Miriam popped up, and I said, let's go. We went and we loved it.
Church is supposed to be about community and fellowship, and not just getting your card punched to, like some quota system to stay out of hell for another week.
And it's not that they have to come because it's an obligation anymore. They're coming because of the welcome. They're coming because of the feeling they get when they walk in. Something like this church is very, very warm. It's accepting. That, I believe, is the best calling card to this.
There's none of that threat that unless you come here, something terrible is going to happen to you.
We're all at different places in our life.
St. Miriam is always a place where every Sunday I look forward to getting up and being able to go, participate, be with other people.
I can place it in one word. It's congruence. We are absolutely congruent with what you see on our website, what you'll hear in this video, the people that you'll meet when you come to attend one of our masses or special events. It's all congruent. It's all the same. And I think that that's what people want. They want authenticity in their life. They want congruence in their life. And I think, I know, St. Miriam has it.
There are no obstacles, no hurdles, no tests, just open hearts and open doors, and a story of second chances. Why not join us? Claim your number and discover your story at St. Miriam.
So, just these last two are, again, one of the 1,000 that I found 10 years ago doing this kind of innovative Christian worship. I'm eager to talk with you about both the things we found in 2006 and the things I propose tonight. I ask your forgiveness for this concentration on my United States-based experience with reforming parishes and congregations in my work over the past 2 generations. I look forward to comparing notes and thinking about our possibilities for ongoing reforming of Christianities. Thanks so much. So I'm really eager to hear your thoughts and questions. Let's just have people stand up and talk as loudly as we can. Thank you, sir, back there.
You've got mics.
Okay. Oh, good.
Turn it on.
Thank you so much for that very considered and wide-ranging view. I don't know whether this is a question, more an observation, really.
Yeah, that might be better. That's good, thanks.
And if I've got you rightly, in the breaking down and the brokenness, of which there has been a lot within the institutional church, within the breaking down and the brokenness, there is a breaking out. And that's what I've experienced from the presentation. Where good community is found, it's good community. It doesn't matter what the institutional restrictions are, good community is good community, and it attracts people.
Beautiful, thank you. I'm not sure if I can match that poetry. I would say one thing in response. You've really certainly identified my own personal experience with my two long-term parishes, but certainly of the many hundreds that I researched as well. That is, one of the things that helps most is when a church is on the ropes. When it is when it's about ready to fail. So in both of my cases, that helped us break out. I would say that I wouldn't want to underestimate the importance of real strategy, real clear thinking, and real attention to who lives around in the community. Other thoughts? Yes.
I just wondered whether you thought that this focus on vulnerability, queerness, democratic ritual and spirituality is actually occurring more outside the church than in the church.
Yeah, thank you. See, this is where I need to be careful about what I don't know in your setting. I can say that for my experiences in the U.S., queerness is, and here I'm not talking particularly just sexual orientation, but queerness in its larger frame is proving to be a real wonderful support for local churches as a way of thinking about that. One of the wonderful things that's happened in queerness for us is as we share the various sexual orientations, it helps us notice that things like national identities, families, the ways we think of church themselves are also too rigid. And to have much more fluidity in those kind of identities is also really important. Yes, ma'am.
On a rather different tack, would you like to comment on the whole, I don't know quite how to name it, but the fear that is part and parcel of change, and of really allowing the vulnerability to be there, for example. We're taught so much for that not to be the case. I mean, the Bible throughout is talking about do not be afraid, do not fear, but we don't take that part very seriously.
Yeah.
Would you like to comment on fear?
Oh, I would. Thank you so much for the question. The first thing I think of is that last verse in the Thunder Perfect Mind. I am she who is in all fears and in trembling boldness. So the first thing there is to remember that God is with us. God is also trembling in boldness and afraid. The second thing, just you've said it better than I think I can. My experience, both as a consultant for churches going through this, and as one who has pastored, is I remember my first congregation, where on my first Sunday there were 7 people at worship. They were all over 70. And they grew to be, in 10 years, they grew to be 150 strong every Sunday. And I asked them whether they would like me to help them die with grace, because the bishop said we would close in 9 months if we didn't grow, or whether they would like me to build every worship service for the 1 or 2 visitors coming and not for them. And they said, no, let's go ahead and build it for the new people coming in. I said, you'll hate me. And they did. But over the long haul, almost all of them stayed. And for instance, as we became, as what United Methodists in America call reconciling, meaning open to all engenderedness, our right-wing folks who had stayed in trembling and fears, I mean, they were going to dinner with queer folk all the time. Because that's what congregation does. If one is patient and open and keeps coming, there's a real chance that a whole bunch of people who are in different sectors can really claim each other in belonging. But you're right, there was a lot of fear on all sides, and not everyone could stand it.
Just ask then, do you actually talk about fear and people's fears directly?
Oh, yes, yes. And frankly, I mean, I think fear of us, not fear by people outside, but fear of us is one of the most important things to preach about, pray about, talk with each other about. I mean, there's so much fear in all of us. Thank you.
My comment is, I think there is so much fear, but often the fear is in our leaders who are frightened to say anything that might upset the congregation. And you've talked about this,
right.
And losing people.
Yeah.
But for me, it's so, I cannot imagine why, if they believe in the compassion of Jesus, that they're so scared. And I can't blame them, but it hurts me.
Yeah, yeah.
You probably can tell me how I can not be hurt and vulnerable.
No, I'm. Thanks for your noticing your vulnerability. Well, I was afraid a bunch of my times, and I've heard a lot of other pastors doing that. But I think you're right that even though we all are afraid of different things at different times, that a trusting relationship and a claiming of what we most deeply desire can happen. It doesn't happen easily or without detours, but for us all to claim our deepest desires, and for the pastoral leadership to hear our deepest desires is important. You know, Ignatius, when he says how to discern, he says the most important thing is to see our desires and say what our desires are. But he says the thing to do is notice what's underneath what we think our desires are. And the deeper you ask, what is my deepest kind of desire, the more trustworthy it is. So asking, claiming our fears and noticing our deep desires, I think helps a lot. Oh, hey, yeah, thank you.
Could you comment on polarisation? I'm quite concerned, particularly with social media, how everything's dividing into two blacks and whites, and no one's listening and no one's trying to understand where the other's coming from. And I think this is just going to end in disaster. I mean, even with things like vulnerability, there are some people, and I'm one of them, because I have a mental illness, I'm vulnerable, but people often don't always want to listen to why you're like you are. And I also have noticed I've got some queer friends, and they say the same thing. They don't want to know their story. But at the same time, we have to understand where they're coming from. We're not all lucky, we're not all middle class, we're not all educated. And I feel for the people that Hillary called the deplorables, I can understand their anger. And it's not their fault they don't have the education and the intellect to understand things. All they're left with is their anger. Can you talk on that, thanks?
Yes, thank you for the invitation. And it's such an important question. I first want to say, and again, I'm going to talk mainly from our country's perspective, but I think we have some shared experiences in exactly what you've said. I don't think I know how this is going to work out. I do not know. I do know that a deep modicum of trust and deep vulnerability are our friends. But I don't think that is an adequate strategy for the deep question you pose, because of the strong feelings everywhere in different directions. I do also think that the congregational form is a size that is better suited to work on this than nationally. So I think it's a great gift to be in congregations. And I think so much of the hostilities come from being alone in society and making things up that one can see nothing other than. And so my experience is that you heard in one of the videos that St. Lydia's person saying, let's not work too hard on getting straight on what we believe. Let's just practice. Let's just work on practicing stuff together, like chopping onions or knowing one another's hurts and joys. So I guess I want to say that the congregational form is one of the deepest resources of a society that has so much polarities in it right now. That would mean that we who invite people in to congregations need to be patient, kind, and honest, and vulnerable. How am I doing?
Good. Thank you.
Again, that's a real question, because I don't know how it's going to work out. Those are my thoughts. Thank you. And yes.
Yeah, I guess one of the things we see about the States from here is we tend to hear a lot of the bad stories, but there's also some wonderful things happening there. And the wonderful thing about the States is, having started from a fairly puritanical origins, and partly blame one of my ancestors for that, the Reverend John Robinson, who led the flock in Leyden, and then, of course, they all went across on the Mayflower to form a fairly homogeneous Christian community in New England. But then, of course, over the years, there's great diversity and explosion of faiths and traditions and forms of worship. Having just recently done a trip with my son from Texas right up through to Boston, we've seen the whole gamut of Christianity. And the thing that I guess challenges us here, or almost bemuses us, is this the fundamentalist creationist theology. Is it because people want simple answers, or do they want to hang on to something that isn't changing? It's really quite unusual for us here. Now, we have some aspects of that in Australia, but this belief of the Bible is right and that there's no evolution, wedded to this fundamentalist approach. Do you have any insights on that, or is it fairly obvious from where we sit? It's fascinating for me to watch.
Yeah. Thank you. Boy, we're getting at some good stuff here. I would say two things. First of all, my experience of building new congregations, especially for young people. It's so amazing how often, for instance, a queer-friendly straight person who is an evangelical says to a welcoming congregation, I really feel I'm so glad to be here. And as far as I'm concerned, the hyper-liberal congregation that receives that person needs to hear their whole story, because it's the queer friendliness that they want, and they don't quite know what to do with their evangelicalness. But to not dismiss it, especially publicly, is really important. I frankly can't remember when I preached against the belief of an evangelical. The second thing I would say is in our country, it was quite clear how evangelicalism began, and this I cannot ever forget. Evangelicalism became the home of the working class in America because the large churches were full of educated people dismissing them. And the working class people knew they were smart too. And so evangelicalism said, let's try to be smart and focus on the Bible and learn to love one another. I don't mean to be naive about the dangers of evangelicalism. And I think that sides often have to be made. But certainly in the way in our country evangelicalism emerged was because working people were left out.
Do you think it'd be a fair proposition that if Jesus was here today, that he would make a slight revision to his Beatitudes and add an extra one in the form of, "Blessed be the queer, for they shall gain unconditional acceptance"?
Thanks. Jesus and I are tight. But I was a founding member of the Jesus Seminar, and we said we would figure out what he really said, but I never really know.
Hello. I wonder what you would advise, or how you would respond to somebody who is coming from quite a confrontational perspective. You're probably aware that Australia is that we're being polarised at the moment by the marriage equality debate, and trying to be very accepting and listening to homophobic friends is very challenging when they come with propositions like it's a very loving thing to do to tell people that they're on the road to destruction. And the best that I could come up with was to say, well, Jesus asking us to account for our lives says, not when did you see me sinning and not condemn me, but when did you see me hungry or thirsty, and so on. And that felt very confrontational to say that. So I'm just wondering how you would go about smoothing that path.
Yeah. I'm going to repeat myself a little bit. I think in the public square right now, it's almost impossible to reach over to one another successfully. And I think that taking positions publicly, as your church has, is important. On a congregational level, I think there's some more give and take. So I have been directly in congregations like this and consulted with other congregations in which there were substantial numbers of queer folk and substantial numbers of evangelicals. It turns out that some of them are both, right? The first thing to say is a lot of queer folk are evangelicals, and they love their Jesus, and that's important to them. That's a queer statement, by the way. The second thing is, I think in congregational dynamics, one of the things that folks have worked on is, what if the evangelicals and the queer folk decided within their worship space not to condemn one another for their positions? I think that is much more negotiable than on the picket lines or in the media. I've certainly seen congregations make some progress on that. That almost always means someone leaves too. But that's where we need to be as grown up as we can and keep with our compassion and our focus on one another, even when some folks need to leave. Bless them on their way. Thank you. Yes.
I thank you very much, and also thank you for all the comments. And I wondered if, in thinking about some of the things that have been said, for instance, that the congregation is a very suitable size for this kind of practice of community. And there's this point, asking, well, are these things happening outside the church more often than they are in the church? And I wanted to bring that together with the fact that a little church which has been very vibrant that I know in Canberra is now dying for the same reason everybody's getting old. But their premises has become extremely valuable to the community who are using it for play groups and University of the Third Age groups and so on. It's a very vibrant place. And I wonder, I feel that you are right, and I would like to say, I have a very great affection for churches as places. They are really incredibly valuable locations and incredibly beautiful locations, and all these things can happen in them, as you say, in a very appropriate size and way. And I just feel like they're the birthplace. They can be the birthplaces of so many wonderful things. And I feel terribly sad when I see them turned into, residences or flats or factories or something. And I think, I love them as generic places, and I think we could encourage that. I mean, this place, for instance, is so resonant with spiritual vitality of all sorts.
Thanks so much.
Do you feel that about locations of churches?
I heard three questions there. I'm going to, I want to comment in at least three ways. First of all, I want to disagree with you that I'm not right in everything I've said tonight. It's simply too important to think that I'm not wrong about something. Secondly, I think what I'm wanting to say is it's the congregational form, not the building itself, that is is a special gift in this time of culture wars. Meaning congregations are a particular kind of space, of kind of relationship, which allows people to make compromises, allows people to talk directly, go away for a few weeks and come back. All kinds of faithfulness. I don't think in my country, there's no other form like the congregational form, in which people can belong for different reasons and on different terms, and where deep love and affection grows in the most unpredictable directions. But you were asking mainly about the space itself. I think that Christianity is in such inevitable long-term decline that that a lot of spaces will be lost of this kind. What I'm wanting to say is, if people can see that the real gift is the congregation itself, not the space, then the larger churchedness, the larger institution can say, we are in a place to build all kinds of new congregations. And that might actually be helped by selling some buildings so new congregations in the right place can be built. I work with 6 churches a year doing exactly that. And we never know what to do. We look very carefully at what the possibilities are for the congregation to continue, and we look very carefully at the possibility of selling the building so that some other congregation can become vital. I want to say then one other thing you have prompted me on, and then I think we're done. I think that the model for what some of us are calling progressive Christianity is monasticism in the Middle Ages. That is, the monastics were never the majority. But what the monastics did is they built strong institutions in which they gave priority to deep spirituality and deep intellectualism. And so for me, monasticism produced much more for the larger church than its numbers would have been predicted. But they tried to be a minority that was really vital in its spirituality and vital in its thinking. So I think that we've already faced this moment historically in one way or another, and that is, I think, a really good example for the way to be a vibrant minority. Thanks so much for all of your work.
Thank you, Hal, for all your work, for the preparation that you've put into your talk tonight, but also for your willingness to engage with our questions, for your vulnerability, for not coming up with an agenda for us to adopt, but some deep questions that have shifted some of the ways that we might be understanding our own journey as progressive Christians in this community at Pitt Street. But I also want to acknowledge that there are so many people here who I don't know and who have different experiences of church. So I hope that you have all been enriched to think more deeply about your questions and to stay with them, and to let that queerness kind of mix things up. And I think especially in a time of great polarisation, when advocacy is important, but so is openness, and so is uncertainty. And one of the things I have found most disturbing about the engagement in social media is the absolute certainty with which people have been coming to the social media spaces I'm in and emphatically declaring what is true. And I think the challenge to us now is to not mirror that back to them, but to be open to a different space, as we still stand for justice and compassion in everything we do. So, Hal, there's been so much in sharing the stories of those congregations that have sort of touched our different cultural experience and awakened some interesting thoughts. We look forward to welcoming most of you back tomorrow for our seminar day, which will start with Hal speaking about that little fragment and some other wonderful pieces that have made Christian orthodoxy very anxious, but have deep resources for the spiritual journey that we are seeking to be on. So I look forward to welcoming you back, and I wish you well as you go into the night. And please join me in another thank you to Hal.